Hi, I'm Dave, and this is Dave's Weird Project. In this video, I'm making some terrain for the orcs I painted last time. A little orc munitions dump. Let's take a look. In my last video, I painted up a few orc boys for the WoW. I'm going to use them in a kill team squad first, and then maybe eventually build up a whole orc force. I thought it'd be cool to give them a little space of their own, a little piece of terrain that's just theirs. So I came up with this idea for an ammo dump, someplace behind the front lines of whatever they're getting up to, but it still needs to be defended, so there's a little tower to post guards on, and a little shack to hold their ammo, and it's messy because they're orcs. I cut out a piece of foam board and then used the boys' bases to decide how big the footprint of the tower and the shack should be. I wanted them to be able to fit 4 on top of the tower, and then the shack was basically the same size. I cut the legs of the tower with square dowel. I think this is 1/4 inch across. And I used my razor saw and a little mini miter box to get nice square cuts. This thing has been such a valuable investment. I highly recommend it if you're going to be doing anything with like wooden dowels, just to get nice clean square cuts when you need them. This was probably the most precise part of the build, as I tried to get all the dowels exactly the same length. I cut out some corrugated cardboard in the square shape of the footprint of the tower, and then cut out some notches at the corners that the supports would fit into. This cross-stitch mesh is really easy to get, and it makes great gratings, especially when you cut it at an angle so that the diamond shapes are, well, diamond shapes and not squares when compared to your squarish floor. This is going to be the upper level of the tower. I decided to cut holes in the base for the tower legs to go into, because I was kind of worried that they were not going to be super supported, just being stuck to the surface of the base and then the floors, and this ended up working out okay. The lads are going to need a way to get up to the second floor of the tower, so they need a ladder, but they don't have time for fancy ladders with rungs and supports, so they just take a plank and nail a bunch of 2x4s to it. I'm almost ready to put the tower together, but I was a little worried that the second floor would not be supported just by being glued to the sides of the supports. So I cut some little sections of square dowel and glued them to the sides of the supports as kind of more support. It's all about support. We all need support. While those dried, I got ready to start on the shed, cut out the walls out of more corrugated cardboard. Just real simple rectangles of roughly equal length. And then just hot glued all that together with some square dowel cutoffs as inside supports. You don't need to see them, so they don't have to be good sizes or anything like that. They're just there to be right angles. I put a top on it, but it's going to end up getting covered up with a better roof anyway, so no worries there. Then I cut a bunch of irregular rectangles from pizza box cardboard, just food packaging cardboard, and use those to make basically like panels that are showing that the sides of this thing are just kind of nailed together from whatever the orcs could find. A lot like I did in my Wasteland shack a few vids back. I wanted that corrugated metal look for the roof. I picked up this gadget a while back that does paper crimping, and it makes this cool corrugated look. So I've got some heavy duty construction paper I put through it, and then cut that out in the shape of the roof. I use one piece of square dowel to make the roof tilted a little bit upward so that any rain runs off down to the back. Orcs understand rainfall or something, right? Alright, I'm putting the tower together at last. I put the whole base on top of some parchment paper, which is non-stick, so any glue that gets on there will hopefully come off fairly easily. And then I just drop a big glob of hot glue into the square hole and up against the sides of the floor, and shove the post into it. Now I could glue all 4 posts in and then glue the second floor on, but that might end up with the legs all wonky and weird angles and the second floor doesn't fit. So I go ahead and put the second floor attached to the first post, and then glue all the other posts in so that they all come together nicely. Now that the main structures are built, it's time to start adding on all those cool little details and greebles. I love that word. And just start filling out, make it look more alive. So first thing I'm going to do is make a door for the shack. Cut a rectangle of the right size out of just thin card, and then cut a bunch of toothpicks and glued it to it to make it look like sort of a patched together pole door like you'd see in, an old like jungle combat movie or something. And it needs the frame to sit in, so I cut out some thin strips of chipboard and then glued them into double thickness length to make a frame. Super glued that to the sides of the door and the top. To hide all the edges and seams of the second floor and the supports for it, I cut strips of the thin card and wrapped it around, leaving a space for the ladder. And then to make that sufficiently orky, I glued on strips of card cut in like spikes to look like sheet metal spiky bits that they've glued on to make the tower look mean. Then I put some white glue and coarse sand around the base of the tower to just kind of build it up, make it look like it's banked up against the floor. One feature I really wanted to have from the very beginning was little crates of ammunition just kind of scattered around. Like, yeah, most of it's in the shed, but they're orcs, so they aren't too picky about cleaning up. So there are just some crates hanging around in case they need to grab some really fast. I cut a strip of 1/4 inch wide chipboard and then cut that into little 1/2 inch long sections and just glued those down with white glue directly to the base to make little square shapes that are going to be the crates. To make the actual ammo piled up in the crates, I found this old plastic rod. I think it's 1mm, and I just grabbed 3 or 4 of those and bundled them together and clipped off little lengths into a cup, and just kept doing that until I felt like I had enough. It was going to take a lot of those little pieces to fill the crates completely, and I didn't want to cut that many. So I used white glue and coarse sand to just sort of bulk in the bottom of the crates, and then I would glue the rods on top. Getting the little rods of ammo in there and to stay and look natural was kind of a challenge. I used some of the spray glue that I got for my last big project and just sprinkled ammo on top, and then used tweezers to pick some up and kind of place it strategically so that it looked a little better. And yeah, it took a while, but I feel like I did okay. The next few steps were about texturing the base. I scattered several pieces of the cut rod around to look like ammunition and shell casings that were just strewn about. I also used coarse sand and baking soda glued down to various spots just to make a varied ground texture. A highly secure location like this needs a fence, so I cut out strips of thin card and glued it around the edge of the base, with a space in the back for the entrance to the camp. In a step I probably should have taken much earlier, I cut a kind of slope at the back where the entrance is, so people can roll up wheeled vehicles or carts or whatever that are full of ammo. It was much more difficult to do this after the fence had been glued on and all the texturing done. The tower was lacking something, so I used sprues from all the models I've been making to make struts that would go across the legs and look like support pieces, but haphazard, very orky. I glued the ladder on, and then went looking for some other little bits to liven it up. I found this gas can still on a sprue and cut that out to lean up against the shack. Then I found some old metal spiky clubs and axes to just sort of stick around like orcs are ready to pick them up and use them when they need them. I put a bead of hot glue around the door frame to cover up the gap that's there naturally because I glued it on top of all the little details. And hopefully it just will end up looking like a crappy orc welding job. And the final build detail before painting is to make these spikes also out of old sprue, and they're going to go all around the inside of the fence. Alright, that's the whole thing built. Now we still have to paint it. That's coming right up, but first I just want to ask real quick, if you're enjoying this, please click the like button. Maybe consider subscribing and sharing, and it really helps the channel and I really appreciate it. Any comments you want to leave is great too. Now, on to the painting. I sprayed the whole thing with Krylon black primer, and then covered all of the base with this muddy brown. I think it's real brown from folk art. It's just craft paint. Then I dry brushed on a much lighter brown in sort of random patches just to vary the tone a bit. Then I also dry brushed on this green in random places for where there might be some grass still. I end up flocking this later and I think it looks pretty good. For the shack I want a really red rusty color, and I'm going to try a technique I've used before, specifically on my Wasteland shack a few vids back. I start by painting the different panels in different shades of gray, different levels of gray, to vary the value. Then I paint over that with the red color that's going to form the base of the rusty color. Then I stipple on a very dark brown, almost black, in sort of splotches all over the thing. This is where the rust has turned darker, and that's what rust does, because I'm a rust expert. Anyway, then we dry brush on some silver color kind of in the middle of those sections where more of the bare metal is showing through, and also hit the edges of the roof with that color just to make them stand out, to remind us that this was cut from metal and the edges are probably still fairly shiny. And that's about it for the rust effect, and I think I did alright here. The crates, the rungs of the ladder, and some strips on the first floor of the tower I also painted with those different gray values to see if I could also make a sort of varied level of brown when I paint them as wood. And then to start doing that wood, I used camel, my favorite light brown color, and just went over all the pieces that are wood. The legs of the tower, the crates, the rungs of the ladder, the door frame, the door itself. And then all the ammunition in the little crates gets painted silver, along with the little weapons along the side and the support struts that are crisscrossing the tower. And all the spikes around the edge of the fence. I took a very light gray and dry brushed that in a lot of different places, the embankment around the base of the tower and the base of the shack and a few different spots, maybe some of that lighter colored mud, just to kind of bring the value of the whole piece up a little bit and add a bit of a dusty look here and there. And as I mentioned earlier, I sprinkled some glue and some flocking over the green parts to add a little more texture and a little more life to it. Here it is all finished up and the lad's hanging out on it. I'm pretty happy with how it came out. I think my favorite part is the top of the roof. It came out really well. It's really not hard to achieve this rust effect. It just takes a few different layers and a little sort of careful placement at each stage. And yeah, I think it works really well. The top of the tower looks pretty good, I think. I love this cross-stitch mesh and the effect you get with it. It's really easy to get a nice brushed metal great effect on this, and it can really add some cool detail to any sort of industrial pieces or futuristic pieces. The varied ground texture came out pretty well, and the door, the little ammo crates I think look cool too. They could have been done a little better, maybe if I had actually made enough ammo to just fill them without relying on filler underneath, but you know, lesson learned. The door and the little gas can are nice details, and I really like the way the little ramp ended up looking. There's this sort of paper cutout there from the paper on the foam board, but it actually looks cool, like it's sort of broken concrete there. Maybe they installed this somewhere, and yeah, I like how it came out. The ladder and the first floor of the tower are maybe some of the weaker points, I think. The color on the first floor of the tower, I tried to go for a reddish brown, and it ended up kind of looking like this dusty rose, and the experimentation with using the different grays for the different levels did not go as well as it did when I made my wasteland shack. You can see it kind of on the first floor, but not really on the ladder. So yeah, so that's that. A very orky place for them to keep all their bullets. I had a really fun time making this. It was cool. I did a lot of experimenting and just trying new things out, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and show me your orc terrain if you've made any. Or any ideas you have for some more. I'd love to fill out my collection of orc terrain for fighting over and getting into the business. And until next time, take care, everybody.